He doesn't have the look we need. Put the groundskeeper's boy at the back table where the judges won't see him." Philip Coburn said it without lowering his voice, which was the point. One hand gestured toward the 22-year-old standing at the center of the debate floor with his notes already organized, and his opening argument already memorized, and his whole body already angled toward the lectern, like someone who had been born knowing where he was supposed to stand. "We need the front seat for someone who presents better. Sir, he's the strongest speaker on the team." The faculty advisor said it quietly. "The way you say a true thing to someone who has already decided not to hear it." That wasn't a question either, so they moved Kendrick Osei to the back table. They gave his anchor position to a boy with the right last name and the right blazer and the wrong preparation. They told Kendrick's father, who trimmed the hedges of Alderton Academy every Tuesday and Thursday for 11 years, to make sure his son stayed out of the main hall during the regional invitational, and his father, who understood better than most the particular mathematics of keeping a job in a place like that, said yes, sir, and looked at the floor. They thought they had handled it quietly. They had no idea what happens when a voice that had been sharpened on silence finally decides to speak in front of people who had the power to listen. The Alderton Academy sat on 3 acres of old New England money, its red brick building separated by wide lawns that Kendrick's father, Leonard Osei, had maintained for over a decade. Leonard knew every sprinkler head, every drainage problem, every spot where the ground froze early in November, and heaved the flagstones up by spring. He knew which faculty members acknowledged him and which ones looked through him as though he were part of the landscape. He had made a certain peace with being part of the landscape. It kept him employed. It kept the heat on in the apartment across the highway, where he and Kendrick shared a kitchen table and a set of second-hand encyclopedias that Leonard had picked up at an estate sale when Kendrick was 9, because he had decided even then that his son's mind was going to have something to grow on. The regional invitational was held every October in the Alderton Main Hall, a long wood-paneled room with oil portraits of former headmasters staring down from both walls, and a raised platform at the far end where the speaking podium stood under 2 pale spotlights. Teams came from 6 schools across the state. There were judges. There was a trophy. There was, more importantly, a representative from the Hartwell Foundation in the audience, a woman who came every year and occasionally recommended students for the foundation's full scholarship to the college debate program at the state university. The scholarship that nobody from a family like Kendrick's had ever received, not because nobody from a family like his had ever been good enough, but because nobody from a family like his had ever been put in a position where good enough could be seen. Kendrick Osei had been on the Alderton debate team for 3 years on a partial academic scholarship that covered tuition and nothing else. He had spent those 3 years doing what you do when you are the only person in a room. Who knows the room was not built for you? He worked twice as hard and asked for half as much. And he got very good, not in the careful way that impresses a teacher, but in the true way, the way that changes how a room feels when you start talking. His coach, a woman named Patricia Marsh, who wore the same cardigan in 3 different colors and kept a thermos of tea at the podium, had told him at the end of his sophomore year that she had coached debate for 19 years, and that he had a quality she didn't have a technical term for. She said it was the thing you couldn't teach, the thing that made people stop whatever they were doing internally and simply listen. He had held that the way other people hold a scholarship letter. The invitational topic this year was one Kendrick had prepared for all semester. He had index cards organized by argument and counter-argument. He had practiced his opening in the bathroom mirror and in the parking lot behind the library, and once, embarrassingly, in the break room at the grocery store where he worked weekend shifts, until his manager told him to please save it for somewhere else. He had thought about this day for months. He had let himself picture it more than he usually allowed himself to picture things. The lectern, the judges leaning forward, the room going a certain quality of quiet that only happened when someone was saying something worth hearing. His father had pressed his one good shirt the night before. Leonard Osei stood at the ironing board in the kitchen at 10:30 at night, after a full day of leaf blowing, moving the iron in careful strokes, and he didn't say anything about it being 10:30, or about his back, or about the fact that Kendrick's school was the same school where he reported to a supervisor who was 22 years old. He just ironed the shirt and hung it on the doorframe and said, "You're going to be the sharpest one in that room." Kendrick believed him. That had been his mistake, or rather, that had been his truth, and the truth had not been the problem. The problem was that the room had a different idea. Philip Coburn was the chairman of the Alderton Academy Parent Booster Organization, a title that carried no official authority and enormous practical power, the kind of power that operated through phone calls and lunch meetings, and the careful management of which parents heard what and when. His son, a junior named Foster Coburn, was also on the debate team. Foster was not a bad kid. He was an adequate speaker who had gotten better over 3 years of practice and who knew, at some level Kendrick suspected he tried not to examine too closely, that he was not the best person for the anchor position. But his father had not raised him in a world that required him to examine that closely, and so he mostly didn't. Philip Coburn arrived in the prep room an hour before the invitational with the specific energy of a man who had already made a decision and was now engaged in the formality of announcing it. He spoke to Patricia Marsh for 4 minutes. Kendrick could not hear the conversation from the hallway, but he could watch it through the narrow window in the door. And what he watched was his coach's face go from her usual focused expression to something tighter and more careful, and then to the particular blankness of someone who has decided that fighting a thing in this moment will only make the thing worse. She came out and found Kendrick by the water fountain. She had both hands around her thermos, and she was not meeting his eyes quite right. "There's been a change to the lineup," she said. "Foster is going to anchor. I need you at the secondary table." Kendrick looked at her for a moment. "Coach, I know. I've been preparing the anchor argument for 4 months. I know that, Kendrick." "Foster hasn't." "I know." Her voice dropped. "I am telling you what I was told to tell you, and I am also telling you that I am sorry, and I need you to understand that those are 2 different things I'm saying at the same time." He understood. He was 22 years old, and he had been understanding things like this since he was old enough to understand anything. He found his father at 11 that morning in the groundskeeping shed behind the east building, where Leonard was sharpening the blades on the hedge trimmer. Kendrick came in and sat on the low wooden bench along the wall and told him what had happened without dressing it up, because his father had never needed things dressed up. Leonard set down the hedge trimmer and looked at his son and did not say anything immediately, which was how Kendrick knew it had hit him hard. Leonard was not a man who went quiet easily. "You want to leave," Leonard said finally. "No, you want to go in there and do what they told you." Kendrick looked at the floor of the shed, at the oil stain near the drain that had been there since before his father started working here. "I want to know what the point is," he said, "of being the best at a thing if the thing doesn't protect you." Leonard was quiet for a long time. Outside, someone was crossing the lawn and their footsteps went soft on the grass and then silent. "It protects you," Leonard said, "just not always in the ways you can see from where you're standing right now." He picked up the hedge trimmer again and then put it back down. "I've kept my head down in this place for 11 years. I'm not going to tell you that was wrong because it kept us from going under, but I'm also not going to sit here and tell you it was right, because I watched myself get smaller every year I did it, and I don't want to watch that happen to you." He looked at his son. "You go in there. You sit where they put you. And when the moment comes, and I believe a moment is going to come, you be exactly who you prepared to be." Kendrick didn't answer right away. His hand had gone into his jacket pocket without him thinking about it, closing around the small thing he always kept there, a folded index card his father had written on. When Kendrick was 13 and had come home from middle school debate, having lost his first competition, his father had written on it, "The argument was right, the room wasn't ready." That's not the same thing as losing. The card was soft now, the ink gone faint from being handled. He kept it because it was the first time he understood that his father had been watching him the whole time and taking it seriously. "Okay," he said. "Okay," Leonard said and turned back to the hedge trimmer. The main hall filled by early afternoon. The visiting teams came in with their coaches and their matching blazers and their particular confidence of students who had grown up winning things in rooms like this one. The judges sat at a long table near the front. 3 people, one of whom was the woman from the Hartwell Foundation, a compact person in a gray blazer who had a legal pad and a pen, and the specific quality of attention of someone who was actually there to hear something, and not just to be seen having heard it. Kendrick sat at the secondary table to the left of the platform, where the light from the main overheads didn't quite reach. From there, he could see Foster at the anchor position doing the particular nervous movement he did with his pen when he was trying to look settled, clicking it against his palm in a rhythm that wasn't quite steady. He could see Patricia Marsh at the coach's table with her thermos and her cardigan, and the careful blankness she had held since that morning. He could see his father standing in the service doorway at the back of the hall with a broom handle in one hand, which was the prop you needed if you were groundskeeping staff who wanted to stand in a doorway without anyone asking you to leave. The invitational began. The preliminary rounds moved through the afternoon in their expected shape, each team presenting, each judge noting. Alderton did adequately in the first 2 rounds. Kendrick answered the questions he was given from the secondary table. Shorter contributions, support arguments. The kind of thing you said when you were not in the main position, and he said them well, and the judges noted what they noted. And the Hartwell Foundation woman looked up twice and wrote something down, and none of it was the thing he had prepared for. In the 3rd round, the opposing team from Westfield brought a young woman who was very good. The kind of speaker who had clearly been doing this since before she could reliably drive, and the argument she made on infrastructure policy and federal funding allocation was organized and sharp and landed with the judges the way you could see things land, in the slight forward lean, the pause before the note. Foster was supposed to answer it. That was the anchor's function in the final exchange, to absorb the opposing closer and turn it. Foster stood up at the podium, and he was pale, and his first sentence came out 2 beats too slow, and Kendrick, from the secondary table, recognized the rhythm of a person losing the thread and knew before the second sentence that Foster was not going to find it again tonight. He was not wrong. Foster's response circled the argument without touching its center, landed on 2 points that had already been conceded earlier in the round, and finished on a phrase that was technically accurate and completely inert. The judges did not lean forward. The Hartwell Foundation woman did not lift her pen. Philip Coburn was seated 3 rows back, and Kendrick did not need to look at him to know what his face was doing. Patricia Marsh looked at the table. The round ended. The moderator called a 5-minute recess before the open commentary period, during which any team member could offer a brief floor statement on the session's topic. Kendrick had not planned the floor statement. He had not practiced it. There was nothing to practice because there was no official moment for him in this invitational. His preparation was stacked in his jacket pocket on an index card with faded ink, and the argument that had been built for the anchor position was sitting fully formed in his chest, going nowhere. He raised his hand. Patricia Marsh looked up. He kept his hand up. There was a moment where the moderator checked the attendance sheet, found Kendrick's name under the Alderton secondary listing, and gave him the floor with a nod that was bureaucratically neutral and nothing more. Kendrick stood up from the secondary table. He did not have notes. He had left the index cards in the jacket pocket. What he had was 4 months of preparation, and a room that had made a decision about him before he opened his mouth, and an argument that was correct and had not yet been made. He walked to the floor space in front of the judges' table, because there was no rule against it, and he stood where the light was better, not the spotlight over the podium, but the general light of the room, the light that covered everyone and made no distinctions, and he began. He did not apologize for being at the secondary table. He did not explain the change in the lineup. He started where the Westfield closer had ended. and he picked the argument up from there, like something he had been keeping warm. And he answered it the way you answer a thing when you have been thinking about nothing else for 4 months, and you are no longer afraid of the room. He was not performing confidence. He was just not performing anything. And the difference between those two things, when you were watching someone speak, was the difference between a room that was politely engaged and a room that had stopped doing everything else. By the 45-second mark, the moderator had not interrupted him, which was not a formality he was entitled to. The floor statement had a 1-minute courtesy window, and no more. But the room had gone quiet in a way that made the moderator decide to let the clock run. By 90 seconds, Foster Coburn had turned in his seat. By 2 minutes, the woman from the Hartwell Foundation had put her pen down on the legal pad and was simply looking at him with her full attention. Which was the thing you looked for? The thing that told you the room had shifted from assessment to listening. Kendrick made the argument he had built. He walked through the infrastructure policy question from its foundation to its practical implications. He drew the connection to the case study that the Westfield closer had cited, and showed where the data pointed in a different direction than she'd argued. He did it without condescension, and without performance, and without once letting the anger that was under all of it rise into his voice, because the anger would only let the room off the hook by giving them something smaller to respond to instead of the argument itself. When he finished, the silence that followed was not the polite silence of a room waiting for the next scheduled thing. It was the held silence of a room that had received something and was still holding it. Then, someone near the back started clapping, and it was not the slow, formal kind. It was the kind that happens before a person decides to do it. 3 rows back, Philip Coburn was very still. Near the service doorway at the back of the hall, Leonard Osei had stopped pretending to sweep. He was standing with both hands on the broom handle and his chin up, which was not usually where he kept it in a room like this one, and his eyes were wet, and he was not bothering to hide it, because there was no one near the doorway to see it except himself, and he had spent long enough hiding things from himself already. The moderator called the end of the commentary period. The judges conferred. The Hartwell Foundation woman had turned to a new page on her legal pad. Foster Coburn found Kendrick in the hallway during the deliberation break. He stood there for a moment doing the pen-clicking thing against his leg, not against his palm, which meant he was more nervous than he was trying to look. That was the argument, Foster said. It was not an apology, and it was not an apology. It was a 20-year-old saying the truest thing he could find in that moment. I know, Kendrick said. I couldn't find it out there. I knew it was there, and Foster stopped. My dad told me I was ready for that position. You'll be ready for it, Kendrick said, and he meant it, because Foster was not his problem and never had been. The problem had never had a face you could put a name to. It was a system of small arrangements made by people who had good reasons for everything, and whose good reasons happened to always arrange things in the same direction. Foster nodded and looked at the floor and went back toward the main hall. Patricia Marsh came into the hallway a moment later. She closed the door behind her, and she stood there with her thermos, and she looked at Kendrick for a long moment. I should have said something this morning, she said. You did what you could know. She shook her head. I did what was easy, which is not the same thing, and I've been telling students the difference between those two for 19 years, so I am fully aware of the irony. She held out her hand. You made the argument. I'm sorry I didn't make it possible for you to make it sooner. He shook her hand. The judges returned. Alderton placed second in the invitational overall, which was better than the previous year, and the official commentary from the judges' table noted 2 speakers by name. One of them was the Westfield closer. The other was Kendrick. The Hartwell Foundation woman did not make announcements at the event. That was not how it worked. What happened was that 3 days later, Patricia Marsh received an email asking for Kendrick Osei's contact information, and she forwarded it to him with a message that said only, "This is the one. Call her back today." He called her back that afternoon, from the parking lot behind the grocery store, standing next to the same dumpster where he had once rehearsed his opening argument, because it was the only quiet place available, and some places carry your history whether you like it or not. The conversation was 20 minutes. The Hartwell Foundation woman, whose name was Dr. Anita Webb, told him she had attended the Alderton Invitational for 6 years, and that what she had watched him do in the floor commentary period was not something she saw often, and that the foundation had a full scholarship for the university debate program, and that she would like to know if he was interested in applying. He told her the first true thing that came into his head, which was that he had been interested in applying since before he knew the scholarship existed, and she laughed and said that was the right answer. It did not happen all at once after that, because those things never do. There was an application, and then an interview, and then a formal review, and there were 3 weeks in January where the waiting felt longer than the previous 3 years combined. But the call came on a Tuesday morning while Leonard Osei was at Alderton, trimming the hedges on the west side of the property. And when Kendrick reached him, Leonard was standing in the cold with the hedge trimmer at his side, and his work gloves still on. And Kendrick told him, and Leonard didn't say anything for long enough that Kendrick thought the call had dropped. Then his father said, "You know what I'm doing right now?" "What?" "I'm standing in front of the school that told my son to sit at the back table," Leonard said. "And I am having the best conversation of my life." He paused. "I'm going to have to sit down. There's no chairs out there." "I'm aware of that," Leonard said, and laughed, and it was the kind of laugh that had been saving itself up for a while. The semester Kendrick started at the university, Leonard Osei gave 2 weeks' notice at Alderton Academy. Not because they had done something new to him, but because Alderton had spent 11 years being exactly what it was, and he had spent 11 years being what he needed to be inside it, and both of those things had served their purpose, and the purpose was now complete. He found a position with the City Parks Department the following month. The work was similar. The hedges did not know or care who trimmed them, but Leonard came home at night and stood in the kitchen and had a quality of ease that Kendrick had not seen in him before, the ease of a man who no longer spent his day calculating the cost of being seen. On the first day of the university debate program, Kendrick Osei walked into a room full of people who had been winning things in rooms like this one their whole lives, and he found a seat and opened his notebook, and he was not the only person in the room who knew the room was not built for him. He was just the one who had already decided that didn't matter. He had the index card with him. He carried it the way he always had, in the inside pocket of his jacket, but he had written something on the back of it that hadn't been there before. He had written it on the morning after the call from Dr. Webb, sitting at the kitchen table where the second-hand encyclopedias still lived, in the same kitchen where his father had ironed his shirt the night before the invitational. What he wrote was, "The room doesn't decide what's true. It only decides what gets heard. Your job is to outlast the silence between those two things." He went into the room and added his voice to it, and that was the beginning of a different kind of story, one that he was still in the middle of, which is the only place any true story ever really is. Maybe you've sat at the secondary table. Maybe someone moved you there without asking. Someone who had decided before you opened your mouth what you were worth and where you belonged. Maybe you made your argument anyway, or maybe you're still holding it, still waiting for the right moment, still doing the arithmetic of what it costs to speak and whether the room is ready to hear it. The room is almost never ready. That's not the same thing as staying quiet. The argument is yours. The moment will come, and when it does, you'll know it the way Kendrick knew it, not as a decision exactly, but as is the end of waiting.